Welcome. This is your Need to Know. This is an episode recap. So there will be spoilers, sweetie. Music by Sisters AI Rhythmic. Check them out on YouTube.
This is your Need to Know.
Spoiler, sweetie.
This is your Need to Know.
Hey everyone, and welcome back. I'm so excited for this one because, well, honestly, who doesn't love a good deep dive into a movie that, how should I put this? Kind of flopped when it first came out, but then later on, totally became a cult classic.
You're talking about David Lynch's Dune from 1984.
Exactly. The one and only. We've got some really interesting stuff to unpack today. Articles from The Guardian and some pretty passionate discussions from Reddit's movies subreddit, the usual suspects.
Sounds like we've got our work cut out for us.
Oh, yeah, definitely. But by the end of this, you'll not only understand why people are still so fascinated by Lynch's Dune, but also how it, compares to the more recent Denis Villeneuve version. And get this, we'll even explore why some folks actually, prefer the '84 version.
That is interesting. I mean, it's pretty rare for a film to be so thoroughly reevaluated and appreciated for, the things that might have initially been seen as weaknesses.
Totally. So to kick things off, here's a fun fact. Did you know that George Lucas originally wanted David Lynch to direct Return of the Jedi?
Oh, wow, really? I had no idea. I mean, I knew that Lucas admired Lynch's work, especially the surreal stuff he did in Eraserhead and The Elephant Man. But Star Wars, that's kind of hard to wrap my head around.
Right? It's what would that even look like? Imagine a Star Wars movie with Lynch's, signature dark and surreal style.
It definitely makes you wonder, what if he had actually taken the job? Would Star Wars have this whole different vibe? Maybe it would have been a flop at first, too, only to become a cult classic years later, just like Dune.
That's a wild thought. So before we go too far down that rabbit hole, let's bring it back to Lynch's Dune. It's interesting how he got involved in the first place. He was coming off the success of The Elephant Man, which, by the way, got 8 Oscar nominations. So you can see why studios thought he was the next big thing.
Huh.
The director who could, bring some serious artistic cred to a sci-fi blockbuster.
Makes sense. They probably thought, hey, this guy can make a smart artistic film that'll also rake in the cash. But, well...
Yeah, that didn't quite work out as planned. It seems like they gave him Dune expecting, a smart but still commercially successful sci-fi epic. But instead of playing it safe, Lynch went all in on his own, let's say, unique style.
He really went for it, huh? All the surrealism, the visual flair, the whole shebang.
Totally. And I think that clash between what the studio wanted and Lynch's artistic vision is a big part of why the film bombed initially.
It's fascinating, though, right? Because those same elements that made it a flop are now what people love about it. Do you think if he had toned it down, played it safe, made a more conventional Dune, that it would have the same cult status today?
That's the million-dollar question. It's hard to say. I mean, it's a film so bad it's good. Appeal is a big part of its charm. You've got scenes like Sting running around in that memorable winged codpiece, the Guild Navigator speaking through it. Well, you kind of just have to see it to believe it. And let's not forget the battle pugs.
Oh, the battle pugs. I mean, come on, that's classic Lynch right there.
Right. It's so over the top and bizarre, but somehow it works. And even amidst all that chaos, you can see those early signs of themes and visuals that would later show up in his other work, like Twin Peaks.
Yeah, totally. It's like Dune was a testing ground for those ideas. You see the dream sequences, the cryptic orbs, the eerie voiceovers, all those elements that would later become his signature.
Exactly. It's like Dune was this stepping stone where he experimented with surrealism and psychological horror within this, big budget sci-fi world.
And whether it was intentional or not, those elements are a big part of the film's legacy, right? It's like they sparked all these debates and discussions and ultimately made Dune a film that people are still arguing about, even all these years later.
Absolutely. It's a film that defies categorization, and maybe that's why it continues to intrigue people. It's this wild, visually stunning, and totally unique experience.
But you know what else is interesting? We've got Denis Villeneuve's recent adaptation to consider, too. It's like comparing apples and oranges, right?
Totally. 2 completely different approaches to the same story. Lynch went all in on the weirdness, the epic scale, the visual excess. It's a very dot operatic experience, whereas Villeneuve went for a more grounded, visually muted style, focusing more on the political and ecological themes.
Yeah, you can definitely see how Villeneuve intentionally made choices to, like, differentiate his films from Lynch's. And to be fair, his Dune was a huge success, proving that you can adapt this complex story for a modern audience and still stay true to the source material. But then there's Lynch's version. That's just something else entirely, isn't it?
Totally. It's a film that refuses to be put in a box.
Yeah.
But hey, have you ever heard of the Spice Diver fan edit?
I have, yeah. It's pretty amazing what some fans can do, like they take a film and reinterpret it, give it a whole new perspective.
So what exactly did they do with this Spice Diver edit?
Well, the main thing is they tried to make the story a bit clearer. For those who maybe found Lynch's version a bit too confusing or overwhelming.
I can see that. So how'd they do it? What kind of changes did they make?
They added in some deleted scenes, rearranged some of the sequences, and even messed with the pacing a bit, just to make the whole thing flow a little smoother. It's kind of like a collaboration between the filmmaker and the fans, even though it's happening years after the film came out.
That's pretty wild. It shows how much people care about these stories, Like they're willing to put in the time and effort to create what they think the film could have been. And speaking of passionate fans, we got to talk about the Dune subreddit. It's like a goldmine of opinions and interpretations. There are some people who actually think Lynch's film, despite all its flaws, captures the epic scale and the, let's say, weirdness of Herbert's novel better than Villeneuve's adaptation.
What's interesting is that Lynch's version really dives into the character's inner thoughts, like those internal monologues you see in the book. It adds this whole layer of psychological depth that you don't really get in Villeneuve's version, which is more focused on the action.
Right. It's like Lynch is trying to get inside their heads, explore those inner struggles and motivations, and that definitely fits his whole surreal filmmaking style.
Exactly. And those surreal moments, those visually striking images, they're the ones that stick with you, right?
Totally. Like, the Redditors couldn't stop talking about the Guild Navigator scene. They were describing it as both, like, totally grotesque and mesmerizing at the same time.
Yeah.
It's a perfect example of Lynch taking something from the book that's barely described and turning it into this crazy visual spectacle.
Yeah, he really pushes the boundaries of what's considered normal in movies, Even things that some people might consider mistakes, like those weirding modules, those sonic weapons they added for the film, have somehow become part of its cult appeal.
It's true. They're so out there, so ridiculous, that they become kind of endearing. It's like, oh, that's just classic Lynch being Lynch. And you can't talk about Lynch without talking about the music, right? The Toto soundtrack for Dune, with all those synths and the operatic stuff. It's either love it or hate it kind of thing.
Yeah, it's definitely a product of its time, that's for sure. Some people find it cheesy, while others think it's epic. But one thing's for sure, it adds to the film's unique atmosphere.
For sure. It gives you that sense of a grand space opera unfolding, with all the political intrigue, the mystical powers, and of course those giant sandworms. Speaking of which, did you see those Reddit threads debating which film depicted them better?
Oh yeah, the classic practical effects versus CGI debate. Always a good one.
Right. Some people prefer the practical effects in Lynch's Dune, while others are all about the CGI spectacle of Villeneuve's sandworms.
Yeah, both approaches have their merits. Lynch's sandworms have that, tactile, almost Lovecraftian feel, while Villeneuve's are just like mind-blowing in their scale and detail.
It's all about personal preference, I guess. What matters is that both films capture that awe-inspiring feeling of these creatures, their role in the ecosystem of Arrakis, and the fear they instill in the characters.
Absolutely. But, one of the most controversial things about Lynch's Dune is the ending. It's pretty different from the book, right? It's much more hopeful, even triumphant.
Oh, yeah, for sure. A lot of people think that Lynch's ending kind of undermines the whole message of the book, which is much more cynical and explores the dangers of blind faith and all that. Herbert's novel is not afraid to show the dark side of Paul's rise to power. But Lynch's film, it kind of paints him as this classic hero who brings peace and prosperity to Arrakis. Do you think that takes away from the film's impact?
It's an interesting question. I mean, Herbert himself was actually involved in the script, and apparently he approved of the ending, so maybe he saw it as a valid interpretation, even if it was different from the book's tone.
Huh, I didn't know that. But it does make you think about the whole process of adaptation, right? Like, how much can a filmmaker change the source material to fit their vision?
It's a tough balance. You want to stay true to the spirit of the original work, but you also have to think about the medium you're working with and what the audience expects. And with Dune, well, it's been adapted so many times, and each version brings something different to the table.
Yeah, it's true. But even with all the changes, all the controversy, Lynch's Dune has definitely left its mark on sci-fi cinema. It pushed the boundaries of visual storytelling, showed us this strange, surreal world filled with, well, weird creatures, amazing sets, and those incredible costumes.
Totally. I mean, even if people didn't love the story itself, those images stuck with them. You can see the influence of Lynch's Dune in so many sci-fi films that came after.
For sure. And it's funny how the success of Villeneuve's Dune has almost given Lynch's version a new lease on life. It's like people are rediscovering it, appreciating it in a whole new way.
Yeah, it's a testament to the power of cult films. They find their audience over time, often through word of mouth and those passionate online communities.
And speaking of which, let's head back to that Dune subreddit for a minute. It's amazing how people are still dissecting the film, debating its merits, and just gushing over its, well, quirky charm.
It just shows you how a film, even one that was considered a flop at first, can still spark meaningful conversations and inspire so many different interpretations.
And some of those debates get pretty heated, like that one about who played Baron Harkonnen better, Kenneth McMillan in Lynch's version, or Stellan Skarsgård in Villeneuve's.
That's a good one. I mean, both actors brought something unique to the role, right? McMillan went full-on villain, while Skarsgård was more subtle and menacing.
It's all about how you connect with the character, I guess. But the fact that people are still talking about these performances, comparing them, it just shows how much of an impact both films have had.
Definitely. It reminds us that there's no one right way to interpret a story, especially one as complex as Dune. Each adaptation has its own strengths and weaknesses, its own unique vision, and it's up to the viewer to decide what resonates with them.
And that's what's so cool about art, isn't it? It opens up all these different perspectives, encourages dialogue, and sparks debate. And with Dune, it's a story that just keeps captivating and inspiring people, no matter which version they prefer.
It's true. And speaking of unique perspectives, Lynch's Dune, for all its flaws, has definitely left its mark on sci-fi cinema. It pushed the boundaries of visual storytelling, introducing audiences to a strange, surreal world filled with bizarre creatures, intricate sets, and those stunning costumes.
Absolutely. I mean, even if the story itself didn't resonate with everyone, the imagery was just so powerful, so unforgettable. It influenced the look of so many sci-fi films that came after. It's amazing how much Dune is still talked about, even after, 40 years since Lynch's version came out. We've covered a lot, the story, the characters, all those visuals, but I think it's worth talking about the impact it had on, filmmaking itself. Some people argued that Lynch's Dune, even though it wasn't a smooth ride making it, actually helped pave the way for a new kind of sci-fi film, one that was more visually ambitious,
Yeah, I see that. I mean, think back to the early 80s, what sci-fi movies were like then. A lot of sequels, reboots, it was all pretty safe, stuck in the same old rut.
Right. And then Lynch comes along with Dune. Its crazy visuals and that, unconventional way of telling the story. It was a total breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
It was different, challenging what a sci-fi film could be.
Exactly. And even though it wasn't like a box office smash, it definitely planted a seed. It showed that people were hungry for sci-fi that was more than just spaceships and laser beams.
Totally. They wanted films that explored big ideas, that pushed the boundaries of what you could do visually, and that weren't afraid to be, a little weird and wild.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see that influence in the films that came after, like Blade Runner with its cyberpunk look, or Dark City with its surreal, dreamlike cityscapes.
Oh, for sure. Dune really expanded the visual language of sci-fi. It showed that it could be just as imaginative and visually stunning as any other genre. And speaking of visually stunning, can we talk about the costumes in Lynch's Dune? The Redditors were obsessed with those designs, all those intricate details and that otherworldly vibe.
Yeah, those costumes were incredible. From the Fremen robes to the kind of disturbing Harkonnen armor, they really brought Herbert's world to life.
Right. It's like they weren't just clothes, they were part of the characters themselves. You could tell so much about them just from what they were wearing.
Totally. The costume designer, Bob Ringwood, he did a phenomenal job. Those costumes were both functional and visually striking, which is a tough balance to pull off.
And the Redditors were also raving about the set designs, those massive Harkonnen palace interiors, the crazy detail on the gilt highliners, even the bleak but beautiful landscapes of Arrakis.
Oh yeah, the production design was amazing. They really went all out to create this believable, immersive world. Like they pulled inspiration from all over the place. Ancient architecture, industrial design, you name it.
It's true. And they even built some of the sets on location in Mexico, which must have been insane.
Right. That definitely adds to the sense of scale and grandeur. You wouldn't get that same feeling if they just filmed everything on a soundstage.
Totally. That attention to detail, the effort they put into making it all feel real, it's a huge part of why Lynch's Dune is still so visually impressive.
Yeah.
It's easy to overlook that when you're caught up in all the, more out there aspects of the film.
Yeah, it's a shame because the craftsmanship is really remarkable. Those sets, those costumes, it's a testament to everyone who worked on the film. It really shows their skill and dedication.
Absolutely. And speaking of the people who brought Dune to life, we've got to talk about the actors. I mean, we've mentioned the villains, but what about Kyle MacLachlan as Paul Atreides? It was his first movie role, and he did such a great job portraying Paul's journey from this, naive young nobleman to the reluctant, messiah figure.
Yeah, MacLachlan's performance often gets overshadowed by everything else going on in the film, but it's really essential. He captures that inner conflict that Paul feels, torn between his destiny and wanting a normal life.
Right. It's a tough role, and he pulls it off really well. And he's surrounded by this incredible supporting cast, too. Francesca Annis is amazing as Lady Jessica. Patrick Stewart nails it as Gurney Halleck, and Dean Stockwell is just scene-stealing as Dr. Yu.
Yeah, the casting is perfect, and Lynch is really good at getting the best out of his actors. It feels like he creates a space where they can take risks and really explore their characters.
That's probably a big part of why Lynch's Dune still resonates with people,
Yeah.
It's a film full of surprises, both visually and emotionally. It challenges you, pushes you to think differently about storytelling, and it definitely makes you appreciate the strange and the beautiful.
Absolutely. It's one of those films that you can watch over and over, and you'll always see something new, some new layer of meaning. Even though it wasn't a hit back then, it's definitely found its audience, and it's still influencing filmmakers and fans today.
So if you haven't seen Lynch's Dune in a while, or if you've never seen it at all, I highly recommend checking it out. Just go in with an open mind, embrace the weirdness, and you might just find yourself falling in love with it.
It's a film that will definitely make you think, and it might even change the way you look at science fiction altogether.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dives into David Lynch's Dune. Thanks for joining us on this wild ride through the sands of Arrakis. We hope you enjoyed exploring this film as much as we did.
This is your need to know.
I must not fear. Fear is a mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. I see the darkness, shadows near. Mine's a battlefield drawing clear. Fangs of fate, they pierce the night. My trembling hands won't take flight. I hear whispers in the gale. Truth and terror start to wail. Eyes wide open, heartbeats crack. With every step I won't turn back. I must not fear, I shouted loud. Fear is chains that shroud a crowd. Face it down, this little death. Breathe it in, release the breath. Feel the quake beneath my bones. Rattling nerves, I walk alone. Ghosts of doubt, they rise and fall. I'll confront them, conquer all. Fear can pass, but I remain. Through the storm promise to keep. I must not fear, I shouted loud. Fear is chains that shroud a crowd. Face it down, this little death. Breathe it in, release the breath. I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear